All right, guys, tonight is Tuesday, November 28th. Oh my gosh, I always do this. Tonight's team call is very special. As you guys know, I gave you a little secret last week for those of you that were on live. We have a very special guest speaker that I actually found on a podcast called Mind Your Business Podcast. I really like listening to podcasts for business growth, personal growth, parenting, any area where we can grow, and especially throw in a podcast when you're doing laundry, when you're doing dishes, when you're driving down the road, when you're waiting to pick up your kids, when you're in a tanning bed, if that's your jam, whatever you do, it's always you always have time to utilize to be more productive. So one day I was listening to Mind Your Business podcast, and James McCrae was actually on there, and he was talking about this book. And I've never heard of this book before, but everything that he was saying, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to listen, or I need to read this book. So what was I know this was horrible, but I was driving and I got on my Amazon and I ordered that book, and I did next and I got this book, and I stopped whatever book I was reading at that time, and I dove right into this book, and it was freaking awesome. I don't even think I got 2 chapters in, and I started harassing James, and I was like, hey, do you do public speaking? And he's like, actually, I don't, but I would speak on your team call. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I'm sorry for harassing you, James, but these are my girls, and I do anything for them. So sometimes that tends to be harassing. So
no way. You've been seriously, you've been really supportive. And I've always seen the stuff that you shared on Instagram and Facebook from the book, and it's super helpful, and I really appreciate it. So no, stalk me all you want. It's cool.
Well, you're welcome. That's kind of what we do, because we don't like to keep things to ourselves, whether we learn them or we figure them out along the way, or we read them or listen to them. We're really big on social media and sharing our journeys and sharing our support. So, one person helps another, and I think it's great and to share that with other people. So,
you didn't really buy the book while you were driving, though, did you? You did. He's nodding his head. He's nodding. He's busted. Wait, while she was driving? How?
I probably was
in a stop sign.
Because I have the Amazon app, and just we don't need to get.
Okay, we won't get there. That's a second book. That's a second.
This is a judgment-free zone, guys. So okay. No judgment.
No judgment.
But it was sometimes the universe is like, hey, this is something that you need to do. And probably the universe wasn't saying, hey, be reckless and take your eyes off the road for a split second. It didn't say that. But with that said, let me introduce you guys to our guest speaker. This is James McCrae in the black square box that you guys cannot see.
That's me.
He is the author of Shit Your Ego Says. He's a meditation teacher, an award-winning strategist. Did I get it? I had to practice that word 5 times.
You got it.
And a writer at the intersection of creativity and mindfulness. He works with people and organizations around the world to unlock creative potential and turn imaginations into results. An avid supporter of basketball, burritos, and yoga. And James lives in New York City. We actually have some girls from the East Coast on right now.
Nice.
Their screens aren't black. So what do you got to say about that?
I'm trying. You're talking and I'm listening, and I'm also messing with Zoom, but to no avail.
All right. Well, we will go ahead and get started. Whether or not we see you, at least we can hear you, and that's what's most important. So me and James James and I'm very bad at grammar, but that's okay, because that's just my ego judging me, and I could care less. So James and I are actually doing a live Q&A tonight. So I'm going to be asking him some questions, and he's going to be answering them, because that's kind of what a Q&A is. So are you ready, James?
Yeah, totally.
All right.
And thanks for having me, and hello to everyone who's listening. You all seem very, very awesome. So I'm happy to be here talking to you, and yeah, let's go.
Awesome. Okay. First and foremost, where does the ego come from, and how is it established?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's the ego is a popular topic. And a lot of people kind of, you can kind of go both ways with it, being okay, the ego is automatically bad and it's something you need to overcome. And it's also accepting the idea that the ego is just kind of a part of our reality. So essentially, like in the most basic definition, like in the Freudian sense, the ego is what gives us our identity. So like, I wouldn't know, that my role is to answer questions with you on this particular call if I didn't have some semblance of like ego identity in order to kind of understand this social relationship. So like on the basic level, like people talk about overcoming the ego or destroying the ego. And I think first of all, like that's kind of a misconception, because it's all about working with your ego and kind of managing it as opposed to destroying it. Because in reality, it's just kind of like what lets us know who we are.
Sure.
But like the problem is that like it can be too easy to get carried away by the ego and let that kind of overwhelm our identity, where we kind of lose sight of who we are in a deeper sense.
Right.
Yeah. So like one way to put it is like, because like I study like Eastern religions, and there's this like idea in Hinduism about the difference between like Maya and Brahman. And the idea is that like Brahman is kind of like the eternal, it's kind of like it represents spirit, is the thing that's everlasting. And that's kind of like, I think, the essence of us all and where we all come from. But Maya is like the physical world, and it's like the kind of reality that we face every day that's not the true reality, but it's like an aspect of reality. So I feel like the ego is part of Maya. It's part of the kind of like temporary like earth reality, but I believe that we're all kind of much greater than just that, although that is a part of who we are as well.
Right. So there's good and bad.
Yeah, it's like, it's not even good and bad. It's just like part of, it's like one aspect of reality. Like I think that when we're living on Earth, our senses kind of tune into a very small kind of frequency of what reality is, and the ego is like a very small slice of a much bigger picture. But we don't always see the bigger picture because we're kind of tuned into this narrow ego world. So it's not bad, but it's just small. And I think that we're all much greater than what the ego kind of tells us we are.
Right. And would you say that, I know I sent you the questions before. I may sneak them in. I'm going to sneak you like that, but
I'm ready.
Would you say that a lot of the times the ego detours us, or not detours us, but like it gets in the way a lot in our lives?
Yeah, it depends. If we want to kind of go beyond what I call like the status quo, that I think it kind of does, because I think in a sense the ego kind of limits us, because it's like, I describe the ego in my book as your reactive, attached mind. So it's very reactive. It's kind of attached to situations. It gets attached to things like fear, and it buys into fear as being kind of true and valid when sometimes it's not. So yeah, by limiting your senses to something that is more reactionary and fear-based, it does kind of stop us from going beyond our limits, going beyond the status quo, and maybe accomplishing goals that are bigger than what we're used to.
Right, right. And that's actually kind of leading me into the second question that I actually ran by you. So when we set out for something, whether it's a big goal, a promotion, maybe you're moving into a bigger house, income growth or relationship, anything like life-changing or life-altering, why do we tend to self-sabotage ourselves, or in essence, let the ego take over?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really easy to kind of go into flight or fight mode. And when we're faced with like a big obstacle that's like, okay, this is something new, this is something that's outside of my comfort zone, there's like our natural reaction is to kind of be afraid to fail because it's something different. And not only are we often like afraid to fail, but I feel like very often we're even afraid to succeed in a weird way, because I think what we all kind of are looking for in life to some degree is kind of transformation. And if transformation happens, then what next? Then we suddenly have to kind of live up to the dreams that we set out for ourselves and the dreams that we accomplished. And then there's always a worry about kind of what our family and friends will think, and whatnot. So I think, you know, the ego will give you a million reasons why we can't do something. It's like really easy to think of excuses why we can't do something, whether it's like a fitness goal for ourselves or a career goal or a relationship goal. I mean, I could give you a million reasons why I can't do a lot of things that I'm setting up for myself. But it's like those reasons are just in your head. Like those are reasons that are kind of gut reactions from the ego, like knee-jerk reactions. And it's like you can continue to move forward and just not listening to those reasons and kind of manage the ego's inputs to the degree where you're still pushing forward in spite of all of the quote unquote reasons why you can't do something.
Right. Do you think people fear success because subconsciously they feel like they don't deserve that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I think that, you know, we kind of get, you know, I think it's like more like we get used to a kind of what society's definition of success might look like, and we fall into the social pressure of conforming to certain definitions of success that may not be true to ourselves.
Sure.
I think we're often kind of forced to play kind of cookie cutter roles in society. So when it comes to breaking away from those roles and those habits and those patterns, and pursuing something that's more like, I think that we all have a purpose and we all have a unique path. And when it comes to breaking away from the status quo and kind of going out on your own unique path, that can be lonely and that can be kind of scary. So definitely it can just be a tough challenge when you feel like you're on your own and you don't have a lot of support. So not deserving it is definitely part of that. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. One thing is, like, all these ladies on here and gentlemen, he's just here voluntary. All these ladies on here. So the great thing about us, we're Beachbody coaches. We all come from different backgrounds. We all live in different environments. We all have different lifestyles. But the great thing is we can be successful by being our true selves. And I think a lot of the times in this business, we think that we have to be, quote unquote, said cookie cutter. Like we fear because so-and-so's being successful, or so-and-so's losing weight, or so-and-so's reaching their goal, or making millions, or whatever it is, that we need to do the exact same thing that we're doing or that they're doing. And sometimes we get distracted by who we are and what we need to be doing because we see what someone else is doing. And so we are tempted to go that route.
Yeah. I think like comparison is super dangerous, and it's like the easiest thing to do, right? Because we live in the real world and we see, like, I live in New York City. I see people every day who are like way more successful and rich and handsome and you name it, you know, than I am. And it's really easy to get caught up in the trap of, I need to accomplish X, Y, and Z to be good enough to even kind of like compete with these people. And that's really easy to do for all of us. So what I always remind myself is that kind of what I said, it's like we should never measure ourselves and compare ourselves to someone else today. We should only measure ourselves and compare ourselves to where we were yesterday.
Right.
Because like, I truly believe that we're all on different stages of our own journey, right? So we should only be comparing ourselves to where we came from, you know, to where we were last year, to where we were yesterday, and just accepting the fact that we're on our own unique path and not trying to distort that vision and distort where we kind of intuitively need to go just because someone else is further along on their own path, or they were born 10 steps ahead because they were born into the right situation that made them so much easier to get where they are now, because those people are dealing with their own challenges. Often we look at people from afar and think, oh, they're doing so well, they're doing so much better than me. But 10 times out of 10, they have their own internal struggles. Like, we all have our own path. We all have our own struggles. And it really doesn't make any difference what anyone else is doing or what they've accomplished or what they're struggling with. Because, like I said, we're all kind of, meant to walk down a unique road.
Right. Absolutely. Now, real quick, I'm going to interrupt our Q&A real quick because Alexis asked a really good question. She said, do you have any tips or go-to meditations to eradicate our egos when we have lived with trauma for so long?
It's funny. There's actually a meditation that I do often that's actually called Ego Eradicator. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of that. I'm a really big fan of Kundalini meditations. I don't know if you guys are familiar with like Kundalini yoga and Kundalini meditation. What I like about Kundalini is that there are thousands of different meditations to elicit different results. So I don't know any meditations that are specific to trauma, but I guarantee you that Kundalini has one that is for trauma. So I do like Kundalini meditations for their variety, and they also have some really great mantras. I think that mantras are a really great way to kind of quiet the ego and quiet the mind, because you're repeating a chant, you're repeating some kind of a song or a mantra, and when you're done, it's just like the meditation is like automatic. You don't need to be good at meditation; it just gets you there automatically. And the other type of meditation that I do regularly is just a mindfulness meditation or a Zen meditation, which is literally the simplest meditation you can imagine. It's just sitting there, allowing your mind to follow your breath, and, thoughts will pop up, but it's all about just kind of bringing your awareness back to your breath and not letting your thoughts kind of take you away, even though they're going to appear. So between mindfulness meditation and a variety of Kundalini meditations, those are definitely what I would recommend.
Do you have any suggestions on where to find guided meditations for Kundalini meditations?
That's a good question. I highly recommend going to a Kundalini class. I think that it's definitely important to have a home practice, and there are a lot of resources in books and on websites to guide you. But I think that without that strong foundation from being taught from a teacher who comes from a certain lineage, it won't be the same. So yes, there are resources online and in books, but I would definitely, so many, I don't know what cities everyone is in, but Kundalini has definitely reached a tipping point where most cities have, even if it's not a full-time Kundalini studio, there's always like these shared spaces for meditation and yoga, and there's usually even the once a week a Kundalini class. So I would definitely recommend checking it out in person before kind of trying to start your own home practice.
Awesome. Thank you. One thing that I've done and like I started duplicating amongst my coaches, and I preach to them all the time, is we do this thing called the miracle morning. So you start the day with personal development, whether it's personal or business. Me personally, I do one of each. Yours was more personal related. And then we write our monthly goals, because we need to know what we're working towards. And then we write gratitude, like we express the things that we are currently grateful for right now, because I personally know what you focus on, the universe gives you more of. And so if you're in the lack of mentality, that's what the universe is going to keep giving you. Like, oh, should I stub my toe? Here, let me give you burnt coffee on your mouth. Oh, let me make you late for work, kind of thing, Or if you express gratitude, like, I'm thankful for the people that I'm able to help today, or I'm thankful that I'm actually able to get out of bed this morning and work out, or I'm grateful for, the relationships, the friendships I have, but expressing that gratitude. And then I am statements. That's something that I've learned through Gabby Bernstein, through a lot of other amazing women. I am statements are huge, because what we tell ourselves, and I think this is the topic you were talking about, mantras and stuff. This is something that I know to be true, is the more you tell yourself something, the more you believe it. So if you tell yourself constantly, you're not good enough, you're not successful, you're insecure, you're too big, you're too little, you're not good looking, like all this stuff, you're going to believe that. So
Yeah.
like writing down I am statements
Yeah.
is huge, and it totally transforms you. Like I've had girls come to me and they're like, I did it for a week and it totally transformed everything throughout my day. Like I was more positive and more productive, but then I skip one day and my day goes to hell.
Yeah. Yeah. That's funny. It really is that really is a mantra. Because, and that connects to the ego too, because the chatter that goes on in our head is like unbelievable, and we're so used to it that we don't even realize like how many thoughts. Like I think the average person has between 50,000 and 75,000 thoughts per day. And like that's why meditation for me is so critical, because there's so much kind of chatter that goes on autopilot. And I think we have a really bad tendency to believe whatever we think. So that's one thing I say in my book a lot is don't believe everything you think.
Right.
Because like, okay, my mind is an animal, and yes, the intelligence is like a great tool, but for the most part, if we're not kind of actively working to control our mind, it's controlling us. And our thoughts can be coming from, me reacting to someone who is rude to me, or just reacting to stress in my life. And before I know it, my thoughts are kind of feeding into me a whole belief system that I'm just taking for granted, because it's like, oh, this is what I'm thinking, this is how I feel, not realizing that, okay, I can actually control how I think and how I feel. So having like, if you don't have regular inputs to help reframe what your mind is telling you, it's really going to be on autopilot. So just like you said, that's how like affirmations and writing in a journal and kind of reclaiming that, that narrative that you live your life by. Because if you don't do it yourself, it's going to be coming from, reactive subconscious sources all around us. And then we're going to be just kind of, at the mercy of, the mental clutter. And that's definitely not where we want to be.
Right. Absolutely. With that said, I'm actually going to skip over one question, and I'm going to go back to it. So don't worry, James. So I actually marked this down on page 161. We talk you talk about happiness. You said we often think we need certain criteria to be met in order for us to be happy. And the big secret is that happiness is a state of mind independent from external circumstances. So that's like basically what you're talking about, because a lot of people think that whatever the subconscious tells us, like, my parents were poor when I was growing up, so I need to fill my life with material things in order to be happy.
Yeah.
Or things like that. But it's actually a state of mind. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, because it's their subconscious or ego or the combination of both, thinking that they need to fill their lives with relationships or shiny objects, or they need to be a certain size, or they need to make a certain income in order to be happy.
Yeah. No, I think that, there's definitely like kind of two worlds. There's kind of the inner world and there's the outer world, and, every day they collide with each other. But I think that really the more emphasis we put on our inner world as opposed to the outer world, the more kind of, I always talk about like sustainable happiness or like sustainable contentment, because if we're living under the assumption that we need external things to fill a place of lack within ourselves, we never stop chasing things, because the secret is that like that hole can never be filled by other things. So as soon as we get one thing and we realize it doesn't actually fill the hole inside of ourselves, we start chasing the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And that's where addiction comes from. And that's where, drug abuse comes from, and, sex abuse, and, all of these things. So that's not sustainable, right? We get happiness momentarily and then it's gone. So I think the only way to get, sustainable happiness or just basic contentment is, like I said before, stop kind of relying on external things and people to kind of fulfill us, and realize that the state of mind that is happiness or contentment or joy or whatever you want to call it exists independent of our circumstances. And that's kind of like hard for a lot of people to take, because it's like, okay, sure, you can say that, but my life still sucks, or like these problems are still in front of me. But it's amazing what a shift in perception can do, because the truth is everyone has challenges in their lives, and some people's challenges are greater than others, but we all have challenges. So it's just a matter of reframing those challenges to, be like, okay, I love the phrase, like, the obstacle is the way, which is kind of implies that whatever challenge we're facing, it's like, it's easy for us to think, well, this is in my way, this is kind of something that makes my life harder. But that's kind of the point of life, I believe. I mean, this is kind of the point of view I take, where we're actually here to learn. We're here to maybe work through past karma. We're here to, become stronger. So the challenges that are in our lives, they're not a mistake. They're there to help us grow and help us learn to overcome them, so we can be stronger and we can be better. So when we think about things in that sense, the external circumstances don't define our happiness, because, they're just part of life, but the actual happiness is coming from inside ourselves.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. How can we heal the pain that's made our egos the way it is today?
Oh, healing the pain?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. And I thought about this one a lot. When you sent this one over, I thought about this a lot. And like I said at the beginning of the call, it's like, I don't think that the ego can go away. We all have, the ego really does kind of thrive in fear and from fear. So, the pain that we experience, especially when we're young, is usually pretty formative in kind of when we shift from kind of living from our hearts to kind of living in our heads. It kind of pushes us in that direction. So I guess I put down two things in terms of how to kind of not destroy and make the ego go away, but to be better at managing it.
Okay.
And the first thing I had was, it's so important to be the observer of our thoughts, as opposed to identifying with the content of our thoughts. Because again, so many thoughts come into our head every day, and if we just associate and define ourselves by what those thoughts are, that's not the true us. Those are just, that's just mental clutter. So it's really important to kind of step away and say, okay, those are thoughts. Those are the thoughts I'm having, but I'm actually going to identify with this place of awareness. So in other words, it's like, to make an analogy about the ocean, thoughts are, ripples on the surface of the ocean. And it's really easy for us to think, well, those ripples are what I am. But in truth, like, we are the whole ocean that's like below those thoughts. We are the ocean of awareness. And when we stop identifying with the content of our thoughts and start identifying with the state of awareness from which those thoughts come from, we start to see the world in a different way. So I think that's super important. And also, and this one's easier said than done, especially for me, but doing our best to move away from living inside of our own heads and working towards living from a place that's more from the heart.
Yes.
And, feeling our way through life as opposed to thinking our way through life. And that's, especially if you've been wounded or have, trauma in your life, that's really hard to do, because often those feelings are painful. And especially when we first go back to revisit them and start to live from a place of feeling, that can be very challenging, because it's scary to kind of revisit certain emotions. But if we avoid doing that, then we're never going to do the healing. So it's often like we need to shine a light into our wounds in order for them to be ultimately healed, and we need to address them. So the more we can actually listen to our intuition and, do our best to be heart-led and feel our way through life, even if it's painful, it's like, that's the only way you can actually do it.
Right. That's awesome. Okay. So with that said, I know I bounced a little bit all over the place, but I know I sent this over when I sent it. I said, how can we shut up our ego and move forward despite it? But how can we quiet our ego? Because, okay, so the reason for this is because there's something in your book, or the part of the story that you told was, and I don't want to give it away because at the beginning of the call, I'm not sure if you saw, but everyone's like, oh my God, Amazon's going to blow out. Like, everyone's buying your book now, but I don't want to give it away. But you set out on a journey to do something amazing, and something happened.
Yeah.
You found I'm being super vague here, which is kind of
the hurricane. It's okay.
But yeah, the hurricane, and then you were moved somewhere else, and you were sitting there and you were like, how am I ever going to move past this? And I think a lot of times us as Beachbody coaches, or as a human in general, we come with this fork in the road, and we don't know which way's which. We don't know which way to turn. We have this subconscious saying, you're not good enough, you weren't meant to do this happened for a reason, you're failing, you're a failure. How do you move forward despite all the failure, despite all the naysayers, despite the obstacles, the challenges? How do you keep moving forward?
Yeah. It's so important because the challenges are such an integral part of the process that there's no other way to move forward as part of the deal, right? It's like, I as people get more successful, you're inevitably going to get more haters. You're inevitably going to get more people who are kind of discouraging you. And when like that happens to people, I just remind them, it's like, this is part of how it works. Like, I remember when I got my first bad review, my first and only bad review of my book. And I was like, what? Like, how could someone like write this? But then I reminded myself, it's like, this isn't to say that I've made it in any sense, but you haven't made it in any capacity if you aren't having people disagree with you. If you're not meeting challenges, if you're not having people making your life a living hell and, providing some kind of a contrast to where you're trying to go, then you're not doing anything. Then you're just living a vanilla, boring, safe life that like doesn't offend anybody.
Right.
And like you're hiding. So if you're not hiding from life and not hiding from your purpose, like challenges and naysayers and contrarians and haters are there along the road. They're the trolls hiding by the bridge, and that's what life is. And I don't know why it's like that, and I don't know if it's set up and designed that way to make it more interesting, or if some people are just assholes and that's just the world we live in. But regardless of why, it's like, if you're not facing challenges, you're not doing something right. And like, our challenges should be a sign that we're headed in the right direction. And I know it sucks sometimes, and I know it's hard sometimes, but you can't press on without them.
And it always seems like, and you guys could tell me I'm wrong here, but to me, on my journey in all areas of my life, whether it's my business, my own wealth or health and fitness, my relationships, everywhere, where it seems like you go 2 steps forward, you often go 5 steps back.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the universe trying to see how strong you are. Like, if you deserve, or if you're strong enough to handle what it is you're after.
In a weird, I've heard that before too. In a weird way, it's like, as soon as you kind of make a leap in your own life with your consciousness and go through some type of a transformation, that's when it's like lifting up a rock and all of the kind of the bugs kind of scatter from underneath it. It's like, that's when suddenly life gets hard and things try to start kind of pull you down. So as weird as it sounds and as like unfair as it may seem, as soon as things get hard, it usually means that you're headed in the right direction, because we're being given new challenges, because for whatever reason the universe thinks that we're up for the challenge.
Right. I agree with that totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so those were my questions. I said I was going to keep it short and sweet, in under 45 minutes. Do you have time to open it up for a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. But I'm going to put my girls on the spot here because a lot of them like to use the chat box. So if you want to ask James a question, you have to unmute yourself to ask a question. So does anyone feel brave enough? And before you do that, I want to touch on something real quick. You said something about your comfort zone or, staying where you are. And, I've talked a lot about this on team calls, James, recently about how the comfort zone, if you actually think about it, it's uncomfortable to be there. A lot of people say, oh, that's out of my comfort zone. Reaching out to new people is out of my comfort zone. Doing, following the meal plans out of my comfort zone, all this stuff. But then if you think about it, if you're not escaping your comfort zone, you're being stagnant. Like you're content being where you are, who you are, and you're not going anywhere. So you're basically going backwards.
Totally. Yeah, in the moment, the comfort zone seems safe. It's like, okay, if I leave this comfort zone, it's gonna be harder. So I'm just gonna stay here. So like in that exact moment, it maybe feels safe and comfortable. But over the course of a week, a month, a year, 10 years, that nagging sense of discontent and regret for not having tried something new. That is way more uncomfortable. So I think that's one thing I say in my book. It's like change is uncomfortable, but staying the same in the long run is even more uncomfortable.
Yep. I think all of us know that, right, ladies? Come on. Does anyone have any questions for James? They're going to be like, oh no, we're super shy. Watch.
Okay, I'm going to go.
Yeah.
As I'm hiding my head over here.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Alexis.
Hi, Alexis.
I was just wondering, because you did say that you're in your own head a lot. So, as I mentioned earlier, like, my trauma was pretty bad. I'd put it on the dark scale there for a bit. I don't know what I did in my past life, but it wasn't pretty. So,
yeah.
I clearly feel like I chose my family to make sure I didn't do it again, but that didn't help very much. And how do you get out of that head? Because I know inside, and this team knows, like, I'm a goofball and I'm a very happy person. But the minute I start to think and I get in my head, it's just back to this dark place. And how did you proceed further?
Yeah, so everyone's different. So, I'm hearing that you're usually pretty a goofball and enjoying life when you're with others, but you're saying when you kind of get back to your own, alone space and you're alone with your own thoughts, then, you start to go kind of dark again.
Yeah, like even to the point of about 5 years ago, before my daughter, I was extremely addicted to partying, and it wasn't necessarily the alcohol portion, but I was in such a deep depression that I couldn't be alone, like with my own thoughts. So
yeah.
To me, I'm attracting a lot of people that are in that same mindset, and I want to be able to help bring them to this goofy side, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm trying to wonder if there's a way that I can help myself when I'm by myself, but when I can help them the most.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you definitely have a gift to kind of share. So definitely, interacting with people is going to be really good, just to kind of put yourself out there and kind of let your better side kind of, shine. If it's a problem on a regular basis to kind of stay away from the shadow side when you're alone, I definitely think it's super, super, super important to have a daily personal practice. And like, I'm not sure if you have anything that you do on a regular basis. And I don't advocate any particular practice because, I'm not dogmatic about these things. And I think that some people do, things like meditation and yoga. Other people are really into certain religions. Some people just like to write and kind of get their thoughts out of their head on paper and kind of isolate the issue there, you know, through that expression, as opposed to kind of living with it and keeping it in your head. Sometimes it's good just to get it out there and onto paper. So even writing and journaling is a form of, in my opinion, spiritual practice. So, I mean, do you have anything like that you do, not even occasionally, but kind of on a daily practice when you're alone, to ensure that you're kind of like putting the best foot forward?
Yeah, I've definitely gotten in the pattern of doing more meditation. I'm actually in a course with Gabby Bernstein.
Cool.
So that's kind of been my draw. But I'm looking more towards, because I guess it's easy for me to enjoy and embrace my dark spot now, I guess is the way to put it. But I'm wondering more of like, how do I help other people that don't know that there's like this light place and this little happy place?
Right. Well, I'm a firm believer that you can only teach what you've learned yourself. So in that sense, like any challenges that you've had that have been hard for you, like the fact that you've put in the work to, to make progress in those areas, puts you in a position where you have an authority to teach. So I would just say, start by acknowledging that your pain has made you the teacher that you are and can be, and teach from a place of experience. And you can start small. You don't have to go and start speaking to big crowds of a ton of people, but just in your own life and your own daily encounters, thinking about what wisdom your experience has given you that you are now in a position to share, and definitely just starting small, starting with the people that you see on a day-to-day. And I think that like a lot of good practices go with this kind of attract, not promote mentality. So that kind of means not forcing opinions on others when they're not asking for it or looking for it, because that just turns people off and it will make them less likely to listen to you. So maybe just being really receptive to where you're feeling called and where people are asking for your guidance, and just listening for an invitation to share. And when that happens, you'll be ready.
That was awesome. Thank you.
Cool.
I think we should have one more time for one more. One more time. We have time for one more.
Too much wine was Ricky.
You can see me. Anybody else? All right. Well, James, thank you so much. I have a weird question to ask of you, because your screen is not on, but
I know, it's super weird.
We do a selfie, so maybe
hold up my picture to the camera from the book, so people can at least see.
That's who you guys been listening to. So I'm going to do some weird. Oh yeah, Michael's shaking his. I'm going to do some weird photoshopping and plug you in, but we're gonna do a selfie, and you can smile if you want to, because we won't see it. All right, guys. Actually, I'm going to stop the recording, because the people watching the recording don't get to be a part of the selfie, because I'm fun like that. Thanks for watching the recording.